We are joined on this episode by a filmmaker who has directed features including Wrong Turn 2, Everly, Mayhem, and Point Blank, as well as music videos for performers including Pete Yorn and Faith No More. He's also one half, alongside Adam Green, of the popular Movie Crypt podcast. And his latest feature, Suitable Flesh, is now streaming on Shudder. He is Joe Lynch. Joe, thank you so much for joining us on the program here.
Hi, guys. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk to you. As we were talking before, I've been listening to the Movie Crypt forever and been following your career for a while now. So it's a pleasure.
You really definitely dated me when you were like, oh my God, I've been listening to this before my kid was born, who's 10 now. I'm like, oh God, I'm old.
Half the Paper Street crew has honestly been listening to your pod for a while, but we'll touch on the pod a little bit later in the show here.
Please feel touch away. You can do all the touching you like without getting canceled.
So we're starting off, going back to the beginning.
All right.
What gave you the bug, got you interested in film and entertainment? Was there a person, an experience, or a movie in particular that got you hooked?
It was a person, an experience, and a movie all in one fell swoop. The person, my mom, the experience was going to the movies, and the movie was Dawn of the Dead. And for even more context, which usually gets me like cool kudos, and my mom fucking hates a bit of trivia. But I saw it when I was 3. My mom could not get a babysitter, and she was a big horror nut, and she just had to go see Dawn of the Dead. But I remember her telling me, like, Joey, I saw on the poster that it said there's no sex in this film, and that's all she needed. So I remember going to the movies in Pomac, New York, when I was 3 and seeing Dawn of the Dead. And that was my first movie. And it was a very transformative movie because it got me into horror films. It got me into the magic of makeup effects. Obviously, it made me it ingrained the seed of George Romero as being one of the authors who's got a beard and glasses. It was a very pivotal movie for me because from then on, first off, I also thought that for some reason, all the anybody that was in a movie was actually behind the screen acting it out like it was a scrim and they were like doing theater. So ever since that movie, I would run to the front and be like, "Where's the droids?" or "Where's the Wookiee?" Like anytime we'd go to a movie or whatever. But that really was that first movie. I'll never forget it. Again, much to my mom's chagrin, because she's like, I sound so terrible when you tell people that. But it made an impact. And I mean, I can pretty much recall every movie that I've seen in a theater and remember which theater it was, sometimes what screening it was, because from then on, movies were such an escape into worlds that I had never been to before. I had, stories that now I'm starting to sound like fucking Nicole Kidman from AMC. Heartbreak felt good at a place like that, guys. I'm telling you. But yeah, it was just like it was a place that I was so interested in that sometimes it would be the same place, but it would always be a window into somewhere else. And my imagination was always very fruitful when it came to those sort of stories. And I tended to, kind of look at things on the darker side, but in a good way, I enjoyed the little slices of death, if you will, like when it came to horror movies and sci-fi and, the more fantastical stuff. And that's really where it kind of came from. But now my mom, being the responsible adult that she was, she also buffered it maybe to justify showing me all these movies, because we would have a library near us that would be free movies. She could rent out as many movies as she wanted. And to either satisfy her own need for horror movies or even just that we were kind of into it, my brothers and I, she would rent tons of horror movies, but she would also do it and get us an issue of Fangoria and say, like, this is how you did it, to kind of peel the curtain back, to kind of, if anything, demystify any nightmares that we had. Because oh, that's how you make Gremlins, and that's how you slice off a woman's head if you're watching Maniac. So it was, all of this was so integral to my love for cinema, my love for cinema, but also my curiosity on how the cinematic sausage is made. So thanks, Mom.
Well, I won't dare try to replicate the accent that you give her, but it sounds like she did encourage you, because it kind of goes into my next question, which was, did you always know this was your trajectory? Did you kind of segue into that was the bug for the rest of your youth and your teen years? Or did you kind of think that was not really a career? How did you go about, formal schooling or anything like that? Just going through school, was it always, I'm going to be a filmmaker?
I think it helped that Wow, this is like really bringing me back. I think it really helps that with the guys that I was real fans of, again, anybody with tinted glasses, a beard, and usually like a baseball cap or a trucker cap who like to point off into the distance, I was a big fan of. So Spielberg, Lucas, Richard Donner, like anytime you would see one of those photos of one of those dudes pointing off and they got their glasses and the beard and the hat, I was like, oh, that's the director. And one of the few guys that wasn't like that necessarily, but also I think I had projected that anybody who was a director usually lived on one of those cranes that would like sweep over the set with a camera, and there was a camera guy with there, and he'd have a big bullhorn and a fancy beret, or a hat and the glasses and the beard. I thought they all lived in Hollywood, and that was somewhat unattainable as a goal because it was so far away from me. I grew up in Long Island. George Romero and Tom Savini, on the other hand, at the time, this was before I really discovered like the New York sleazecore directors like Frank Henenlotter and Abel Ferrara and Bill Lustig. Romero was my hero back then because I'm like, that guy lives 10 minutes away from my cousins in Pittsburgh. So maybe I could go visit him one day. And there was this video that Tom Savini, actually Fangoria made, that Tom Savini was in, that I'm sure many of your listeners, and maybe you guys remember too. It came out in the early 80s. It was called Scream Greats Volume 1. And it was a videotape that my mom would get over and over again. And it was essentially like a video version of Fangoria, where it showed me how they made the exploding head in Dawn of the Dead and how they did the razor blade scene in Martin. I was fascinated by this, but I was also fascinated in the fact that if I wanted to go meet Tom Savini or George Romero, technically, I was only maybe 90 minutes away from that. Whereas going to Hollywood, you'd have to cut to, the miniature Eastern Airlines like airplane that would fly through the like fake cloud, like in Wayne's World, to get to Hollywood. The accessibility and the regional accessibility that Romero had and that Tom Savini had made me go, if those guys can do it, so can I. And they seemed like, in all the videos and all the behind the scenes stuff, they didn't seem rich. They didn't seem, maybe they were wealthy with ideas or whatever, but they seemed like my dad. They seemed like a middle-class guys who were just trying to make ends meet and make movies and do the thing that they love. And that really inspired me to very early on. And to be honest, there's a very clear delineated line in the sand in my life where anything before August 6th, 1988 was me either wanting to be an actor or a makeup effects artist. I wanted to be Tom Savini. Everything after the first time that I saw Chuck Russell's The Blob was, I am going to be a filmmaker. I'm going to be a director, because that movie in a way taught me, oh, so the director gets to put their hands in all of those departments that I love: acting and writing and makeup effects, special effects, cinematography, music. I somehow something clicked on that day. And I remember walking out of the theater and going like, Mom, I'm going to be a director. And she's like, that's very nice, dear. But the more and more that she saw how I was making more things, and how clearly I was very interested in wanting to do this, because I was making VHS movies and I was hooking up two VCRs and making edits and remixes of movies to music and stuff like that. I was clearly just very much in the visual arts. So when it came time for school, my dad owned a small business in Long Island called Automotive Trick, which was an auto customizing store where basically a fashion designer for cars and trucks. Side note, he had the honor of being able to boast that he customized or tricked out all of the Fat Boys vans, which I thought was really fucking cool, especially when the Freddie song came out from the Fat Boys. I'm like, you guys met Freddy Krueger? I was thrilled. So, but now the reason why I bring that up is my dad thought I was going to take over the business. Such a cliche, it's like the small town, guy makes good with his business. And then, and then he's like, all right, son, it's your turn. I'm giving you the keys to the door. And I was honestly like, no, I'm good. I'm going to make movies. And it wasn't until I got into school and started making stuff, like legitimately like shooting on film and cutting on film and making little stories and stuff that didn't feel like it was just me and my brothers running around the backyard with fake blood. Once they saw that I was like that interested in it and that I was that passionate about it and I really wanted to do it, that was the moment, at least my mom had really said, this is what you're meant to do. It wasn't until there was two moments. It wasn't until my senior film showcase where my film, like my short film High Beams, which ultimately, weirdly enough, got me named Filmmaker of the Year in the Village Voice for Long Island in like 1998. It was the weirdest thing in the world. I never would have expected it, but it was my dad seeing that, and then him going to see like the New York premiere of Wrong Turn 2, which was my first feature in New York City, that he went like, all right, I think the kid's got something here. So, they were always very supportive, but I think my mom was more supportive early on. My dad wasn't supportive until he actually saw that, hey, this kid could actually make some money and sustain himself. He doesn't have to be an accountant or take over take over the business. So yeah, like there was a lot of support, but there was also a lot of skepticism because you hear the horror stories about how filmmakers, don't make it, or they, bomb horribly. And then next thing you know, they're selling insurance somewhere. So I think they were doing everything that every parent wants to do, which is to secure their kids and make sure that they're going to be safe and comfortable, that they can make ends meet without having to call up every month and be like, I need rent. Like, which to be honest, did happen. When I first started out, I was, poor as dirt for a little while, but they always just kind of said, go for it. Go forth with the cinema gods.
Speaking of that time when you were just starting out, I've heard you say that Troma was your second film school.
Oh, yeah.
What were some of the most valuable lessons that helped set you up for success with your career as you started directing?
Well, Troma, growing up with Troma in my life, I mean, that was another movie where my mom, it was one of those films that was at the video store that I had heard about through Fangoria, whatever, that I was really excited about. And we watched Toxic Avenger and, Class of Nukem High, Troma's War. There was a bunch of them that like I was just so obsessed with. And the thing is with Troma was, to many people, that was their like the East Coast Corpsman. And that's what I read about in Fangoria. One of my favorite Troma movies that's not actually a Troma movie is Street Trash. I love Street Trash, but I always thought that Street Trash was a Troma movie. It has the same aesthetic, that kind of like go for broke, make this movie by any means possible kind of aesthetic. It wasn't until years later that I asked, like, here, pro tip, never mention Street Trash in front of Lloyd Kaufman unless you want to see his ears like burn up, because I think there was a point where like some of the guys who worked on Troma movies also worked on Street Trash, and there was a bit of a divide. But yeah, Lloyd does not like, I think he thinks that a lot of people think that movie is a Troma movie, which is false. But Troma was something that these guys came from New York. You could smell the bum piss in the pizza when you watch these movies because they were so embedded into like the New York, New Jersey scene. So when I got out of school, I deliberately made High Beams to be like a calling card for myself, to make something a little slicker. Because at the time, music video directors were the ones who were getting all these bigger budget films. And I love music videos to begin with. And I was even making music videos at the time. So I even made High Beams to feel kind of like a slicker propaganda films, Fuqua Fincher, like Michael Bay kind of joint in a way, just to kind of get eyeballs on it. And, this kid can shoot music videos or commercials or whatever. That'll be a good way station to make a feature. But Troma, I always loved them. So my friend Yaniv Sharon, who was one of my classmates at Syracuse, where I went to film school, I introduced him to Troma. When you saw this kid, he kind of looked like Clown from Spawn. I don't know if that's a compliment or an insult. I don't know. But like, if you can picture the Clown from Spawn, that's kind of what Yaniv looked like without the makeup. And,
depends on who you ask whether that's a compliment or an insult.
Dude, he talked like this. Hey, how you doing? I'm Yaniv, and I love fucking, I love weed, and I love movies. That was his whole shtick. And we became very close friends. He introduced me to metal at the time. I wasn't into metal at the time, and he introduced me to metal. And I introduced him to Troma. And after we got out of film school, he called me up one day. He's like, dude, you'll never believe this. I got a job at Troma. And I couldn't, and he's like, and I heard him say, do you want me to? And there was a cloud of smoke, like a Roadrunner cartoon where you would see, like, I couldn't have gotten in my car fast enough to drive into New York City, which takes about 2 hours, to get an interview to be on the set of the latest Troma movie, which was Terror Firmer. And it was honestly, like, the thing about film school is how you approach it. Like, some people like the theory, some people like the equipment that it comes with. I was firmly in the camp of, I want to make my parents proud. I want them to have the diploma. I want the equipment. I don't want to be told that I'm wrong, that I think, certain movies are certain, like theories about certain movies, because when it comes to movies, who's to necessarily say someone is completely wrong? It's like, I could never understand how someone could be like, I have an opinion on this movie. No, you're wrong. That's fucking stupid. So I went to Syracuse purely for the technology and the resources involved. That said, to be able to be actually on a set, because when you're in film school, you're in a bubble. It's like you and your buddies and some local talent, and you're just putting stuff together, and it is what it is. With Troma, it's like that was one step closer to to Hollywood in a way. This was a legitimate company, in quotes, that was actually making legitimate movies, so in quotes, and like these were films that I loved, with no quotes on them, like legitimately loved Troma movies. So I wanted to be on that set. I wanted to learn in the trenches, and what better way to actually learn how to make a movie than to do it for a movie that is literally held together with duct tape. So that's really what I like. I felt like being there at Troma first as on Terra Firma. I started out as a grip. That was week 1. Then I got cast in the movie as a grip in the movie that had a clothespin fetish. That was week 2. Week 3, I was directing all the background actors. And week 4, I was actually rewriting scenes for Lloyd. And then at the end of it, he goes, would you want to work? Because our in-house writer, James Gunn, is leaving, and we need a new in-house writer. And I'm like, okay. And next thing I know, I'm writing on Toxic Avenger Part 4, and I'm producing the DVDs, and I'm the Toxic Avenger at fucking Sundance, So it really was a trial by fire in a way, and it was as trench heavy a campaign that I could possibly have been thrown into, to never be able to say something can't be done, because if Troma can do it with 59 cents and a roll of duct tape, so can I. And it was a great experience. Honestly, I got paid absolutely dirt money. I got $150 a week. So I was commuting every day back and forth from Long Island, making absolutely no money. But the experiences I got and the stories I had from it were amazing. I got to say, within a year of graduating from film school, and I was writing on the Toxic Avenger Part 4. It was fucking awesome. It was a great way to really kind of show that it can be done, and show that it can be done where you can always be resourceful. Seeing how Lloyd and some of his collaborators could kind of make something out of nothing, and also have a voice. That's one thing that Troma, I think I love about Troma, is that whether you love them or hate them, you can't deny that they have a very unique voice. And I think that's important. I think that unless you want to be kind of stuck in all the other crap that's out there, you have to make a name for yourself. And Lloyd definitely made a name for himself, and I learned a lot from him.
Now, jumping ahead, you had mentioned one of the moments where your father realized that maybe you did have a shot at this was going to the premiere of Wrong Turn 2, which, as you said, was your first your directorial debut for a feature. So I personally remember getting the Mailer DVD from Netflix when I was in college.
Oh my God, I remember that too.
And there was a lot of great behind the scenes stuff on that DVD, which, I miss, that kind of material now, of course. But that was, my first introduction to you as a filmmaker. I'm really curious how you ended up getting that gig. Did any of the Troma connections come in handy for that? Or was it more your work in music videos, both?
That was, it was less Troma. It was more, actually, it was funny. I was just thinking about this today. It's so funny how the domino effect, especially when you're an artist working in a commercial world, where sometimes it's, that old joke of well, what did your last film do? Or what did you do for me lately? Sure, you had this Academy Award winning film or this huge, blockbuster, but your last film tanked. So what have you done for me lately? All of this kind of has a domino effect. And from when I was at Troma, I ended up doing my first kind of official music video for this band Godhead. That video kind of made the rounds a little bit on the West Coast, but it also got me a job where I basically created this heavy metal show for the network Fuse called Uranium, which was basically the other Headbangers Ball. That got a lot of attention from a lot of the metal bands at the time because I had made this thing. So when I moved out to LA in 2002, I was one of the first people. I put myself on this waiting list, and I was one of the first people who got this camera called the DVX 100, which was a Panasonic camera that made images look like film. It was basically a mini DV camera that allowed you to shoot 24 frames per second. And every fucking band wanted this because they wanted their videos to look like they were shot on film and not on video. So I got the camera and it was amazing. I was getting work like crazy and doing a lot of music videos, a lot of videos that ended up on MTV, including Headbangers Ball, which was a huge dream come true. Well, one of my videos, which was for this band called Strapping Young Lad, which was my homage to Evil Dead. And I had the balls because I had met Sam Raimi a couple times in the past, and I had gotten his assistant's email address, and I had the fucking gumption to email him one day and say, hey, listen, like if you've seen all Sam Raimi movies, you know about the classic, the car that he's put in, the Plymouth that he's put in all of his movies. And I thought like, what would really legitimize this video is if I had the classic in this video. And he was so nice. He wrote me back. He said, I would totally let you do it, Joe, but it's on wires right now for Spider-Man 3. But go with God. You have my full blessing to do what you're going to do with the video. So long story short, did the video. Very much like my homage to everything Sam Raimi, including Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2. That was seen by an executive at Fox who was looking for someone to put on a list of 10 people to submit for Wrong Turn 2, because at this point, Wrong Turn 2 had gotten kicked to direct-to-video, and that was considered like no man's land at the time. And everybody that I heard who went in saying like, it's a gig. That's whatever. It's Wrong Turn 2. Nobody saw Wrong Turn 1. Yeah, well, guess what, motherfucker? I was the other guy in the theater seeing Wrong Turn 1 when everyone else was seeing Finding Nemo that weekend. I loved Wrong Turn 1. And I literally was in a theater where there was one other person in that theater. But I felt like that was a good badge of honor. And my manager called me up. I was actually in Tokyo shooting drift racing for G4. And he called me up and said, hey, listen, would you be interested in doing Wrong Turn 2? And then this is before he was even my manager. He was just some guy that I knew, a friend of mine that I met through a friend. And he was like, do you want to do Wrong Turn 2? And I'm like, or do you at least want to pitch on it? And I'm like, do I? And it was because of that music video that they put me on that list. And I was all the way at the bottom. The executive even said, like, just to let you know, you were the 11th person on the list. I'm like, that's fine. I went in there, guys, with 30-page Bible on exactly how I was going to shoot the movie, down to like the rust on the car and the tatters on the clothes from the hillbilly mutants. I did a storyboard of the entire opening scene, and I also included that shot from Wrong Turn 2 where she gets split in half. That wasn't in the script. The original script, when I read it when I was in Tokyo, was it cuts to black when the axe comes down, and I'm like, you can't do that. Like the fans want that. Even when I remember watching Peter Jackson's Dead Alive and they cut to black to the title card, and I'm like, you can't do that. That's what everybody wants, no, let's take it further. But I think it was just my passion and how much I didn't go in there and say, this is a gig. I kind of felt if I'm ever going to have an opportunity to make a movie and make a movie where like I get the opportunity to essentially do, because this was at a time where, I'm trying to think. Oh yeah, it was The Hills Have Eyes had just come out and they released it unrated. And when they did that, that opened up a huge marketplace. And by doing that, like now I went in there saying, I want to make like a lost splatter movie from 1984 to 1986, like Re-Animator, like Evil Dead 2, like Return of the Living Dead, where you can have fun with this movie. You can kind of take the piss out of it and you can add humor because it's so over the top. So I went in, honestly, guns blazing, and the rest was history. Like I think they were just kind of bowled over that I actually wanted a job where everyone else was like, I got bills to pay. I got mouths to feed. I don't give a shit about this, where I'm like, oh, let's do this. I was really excited. And every day on that set was it was hard, especially like I got made fun of because, I was so young at the time. I was 30 when I got that gig, and everybody thought I was the PA, to the point where I actually had people come up to me and say, hey kid, can you roll up these cables and get me some coffee? And the best thing was I did it. No, like I wasn't gonna be like, no, I'm the director. No, I was like, yeah, you got it. And I did it. And then later on, this one grip came up to me. He's like, listen, I am so sorry. I didn't realize that you were the director. I thought you were a PA. And it was just because I was just so happy to be there. I was like full of piss and vinegar. But yeah, I mean, that was definitely It went from having the experience in music videos to being on there to going into that, that room at Nakatomi Plaza, by the way. I still have pictures of me like standing at the bottom of the Die Hard building, which is Fox's offices, doing the yippee-ki-yay motherfucker and everything. I'm sure they saw that too. But it was just, I had a lot of passion and maybe a little bit of ignorance too. But that's really kind of what carried the day.
No, that's awesome. Let me ask you though, because no one really expected a direct-to-video Wrong Turn sequel to be that good, and it remains the best reviewed film of the, I believe, the 7 films now in the franchise. But do you think the positive reception from fans actually did change the trajectory of your career? Do you think if it was another kind of middling or poorly reviewed one, it would have done anything different for you? Do you actually think the response did assist you on the way past it?
100%. Like, I mean, still to this day, I do general meetings and somebody comes in and says like, man, that, I still can't believe that movie did so well or was so well reviewed. I think it started a trend, and I can attribute that like this was a tide changer a little bit when we were going from like the torture porn advent. When you had, and I hate to lump the Saw movies in there, but that was part of it. Saw and Hostel. The French extremism of the early aughts. I think people wanted to have fun again. And, between say like Hatchet and Wrong Turn 2, I thought there was two kind of pivotal films in that year or the year before, but 2006, 2007, where there was a bit of a tide change. But it was also where everyone just poo-pooed direct-to-video films, and it was considered such a graveyard for crap that like I can look at that movie now and I can see all the seams and there's a lot of shoddy shit in that movie, but I still think I see a 30-year-old really excited with a bucket of blood next to them, throwing blood all over the place, going, wee! And I think that translates. I can tell when I watch a movie that someone is doing it for a paycheck, as opposed to someone who's just kind of putting the extra kind of effort and care to go, what we should do is instead of doing an Evil Dead shot, the POV Evil Dead shot into a building, let's do it where it goes from like behind and have it go underneath someone taking a piss. Dumb shit like that. But I think if I was just a fan, I would appreciate that. Now, I can't speak for the other Wrong Turns to that, so I can't speak to like what Brendan O'Brien or anybody else had done with those movies. But, I just felt like I had one shot and I put everything of myself into that movie. And I think that shows because I was a horror fan, and I think that's something, everything from the final girl dying first to the black guy being the final girl, essentially. Like those weren't in the original script. That was all stuff that I brought to the table saying, look, let's change it up. Let's do it for the fans, and I think when fans know that they're not being cheated out of an experience and they saw that like one of them was doing it, they rally behind it. And I think a lot of that, like I did so much press and so much campaigning because at the time I was working at G4. So I had a lot of media experience doing a lot of interviews. I had a lot of contacts. I used every single one of them when that movie came out. I did a shitload of press. So I think it was also just the exposure of, a director who's actually proud of doing a direct-to-video film, getting out there and, hitting the pavement and being proud of his or her work. Like, I don't think a lot of people did that at the time. So I think it was just a combination of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's also the proofs in the pudding. And we, not just myself, but, the actors, the crew, I think once they saw that we were trying to do something a little different and that they saw that this crazy kid was, actually enjoying himself on this, I think that permeated throughout the crew. And then that kind of love shows up on screen. And then if the crowd is happy with it, then everybody's happy. So yeah, I'm really proud of that movie still to this day. And, I'm still shocked that I still get residual checks. So it's still is being seen. And yeah, I mean, people talk about it still all the time. So, I mean, that's the best you can ask for, it's not about opening weekend. I just had a friend I was talking to literally an hour ago about, he just made a movie and it just came out on 2,000 screens and it didn't do very well. And he was really bummed about it. I'm like, trust me, as someone who's been through this before, it's not about the sprint, it's the marathon. And if a movie really has legs and can sustain itself and build an audience from that, it will stick around and people will still talk about it. So I think that's the testament that Wrong Turn 2 has, is that there was enough love in the room and on the set that showed that people want this kind of movie and, and that they're still enjoying it to this day.
No, it's very cool to hear that you're still getting residuals, but yes, that the reaction to it
I mean,
sustains.
let's be fair. It's not a lot, but you know what? It's enough to like, you know, take my wife out to dinner, you know,
I was
every
gonna
once in a
say
while and go like,
if you
guess
don't
what?
get a
It's
charge out
Sizzler
of
night.
even the small residual checks anymore, then you might be fully broken by the
I
system.
know.
But yeah, we still get some pennies on sometimes. It's still nice to get. It's better than zero. But
Yeah, exactly.
so you talked about it helping your trajectory. I know that Knights of Bad Aston you have spoken about and linked in other places, but that experience, famously, Becky, I don't know if you know this, but he predates Zack Snyder in a few ways, not just love of Dawn of the Dead, but in that he had a release the Joe Lynch cut campaign over this
Oh,
movie.
yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm very familiar with
you
that.
remember that? Okay,
drama.
yeah.
Yep.
We won't get into the movie necessarily, but I want to know, coming out of that movie, did that also change your trajectory and kind of get you back into an more indie mindset? I don't mean that in a pejorative, of course. I just mean like getting raked over the coals in a way. Did that also change? Because I know you did like the Venom fan film short on the heels of that with the same actor, Ryan Quanten. And that's a fun thing, as you know, scratching the itch of two of my favorite things, avant-garde cinema and comic books. You made a fan film that kind of legally skirted Marvel, that also homaged an experimental French film, Man Bites Dog, no less. But did all of that come out of just like an anger of the fallout of that?
I was so angry for years over that experience. I mean, I've finally, thanks to a lot of love by my partner and therapy, and you know, just kind of coming to terms with knowing that, again, cinema is subjective. There was a pivotal moment while I was in the middle of the hell that was that experience. And I've told this story before, especially on the Movie Crypt, but you know, for the four people that haven't heard this story before, you know, while I was in editing hell with that movie, because I was told after all this shit that went down and we were like shut down for about 8 months, the investor, the Silver Fox investor, Wade Bradley, remember that name, pro tip for filmmakers, Wade Bradley, turn around and run away. Just saying. There you go. But this Silver Fox was like, Joe, took me out to dinner. And funny enough, I was literally sitting next to Edgar Wright while we were having this dinner. And he emailed me after and was like, "Are you all right?" I'm like, no, but you know, it was good to see you. He promised me that they were going to let me, finish the film and it was going to be my cut. And they were bringing in this producer who'd done, oh, guys, he did Saw 4. So, big time producer here. And they lied to me. They basically just told me lies. And next thing I know, I go in 3 months after I was promised this, and I saw a 74-minute cut of the movie, which was a disaster. I wanted to slit my wrists. But it was in the middle of all this that I had a really good talk with one of my heroes, Don Coscarelli, obviously from Phantasm fame and John Dies at the End and Bubba Hotep, and The Beastmaster, which was easily one of my favorite films of all time growing up. I watched HBO, which meant, it was on every other day because HBO means, hey, Beastmaster's on.
Right.
So I absolutely love that movie. I still, to this day, I'm on the Vinegar Syndrome disc in many guises. But we were thrilled to have him on the Movie Crypt, and we were literally, we were waxing Don's car big time over Beastmaster. And while we were talking about it, I noticed that his face was like starting to like twinge. He was getting the shakes a little bit. And I'm like, Don, are you okay? He goes, yeah, they took the cut away from me. It was exactly the situation that I was going through at that point. And everything changed from there. Or at least a major part of it, because I was like, here's someone who made this movie that I can legitimately watch with no irony and no snark and no cynicism at all. I can watch Beastmaster and go, that's a legit great movie. And on the director's side of it, the director was saying everything that I was saying, where this movie sucks and it's not the cut that I wanted. It was not my vision. It got taken away from me. It's a pale comparison to what I wanted to do. It was like a mirror reflection of what I was going through that he went through 30 years ago. So from then, honestly, I like, whenever I used to stop someone if they said they liked the movie and go, well, let me tell you what really happened. And then 45 minutes later, the guy's like, dude, I just wanted to get my latte from Starbucks. Like, I got to go. I stopped doing that because and this is like one of the valuable lessons that I think all of us as filmmakers have to realize at one point or another, is that no matter how good your fucking movie is, someone's going to hate it. Or no matter how much you hate that movie because of one thing or another, someone's going to like that movie. Every cinema is an art form. It is subjective. everybody comes to the table with different likes, different dislikes, different fetishes, different interests. So everybody's coming to the table differently. If you're lucky, you make a movie that is a populist film that everybody can agree is a great movie. In most cases, I make movies that not everyone is going to fucking like, but if I wanted to make a movie everyone would like, then I'm not the person that I've always wanted to be. That's something that, my partner, we worked together a lot. She had to kind of remind me a lot during Suitable Flesh, which we made, not to jump ahead, but like we made deliberately for a very specific audience. The audience that loves Lovecraft, the audience that loves Stuart Gordon movies, that likes, very weird, fucked up movies with very strange choices. We were not making a 4-quadrant movie in the slightest. But when reviews are starting to come in, I was like, I might have gotten like high on my own supply a little bit because of Tribeca, because we were getting rave reviews. And then when the Rotten Tomato scores were going down, I was like, oh my God, I failed. And she was like, you didn't make a movie for a fucking summer blockbuster. You made a movie for us. You made a movie for the freaks. Stop beating yourself up over it. And that's something that every filmmaker needs to realize, unless they, actively want to go out and make that movie. Now, with Knights of Badassdom, I did want that. Like, I even got a shirt when that movie came out. I think Eli Roth had one too, because this was my second film, and I was very particular on what my second film, after the critical and box office, well, not box office, but the returns on Wrong Turn 2, it's still to this day, I believe, is one of their biggest money makers ever in the direct-to-video world. That and like The Sandlot 2, that's it. But after the success of that on both sides, I was starting to get meetings. I was getting a little buzz. I was getting a little heat, if you will. And, because I passed on Knights Badassdom twice, and it wasn't until like I read it again and went like, all right, I have very specific ideas with this, but I basically want to make the Goonies for grownups. I want to make an R-rated Goonies, and, I want to do it with respect. I want to make it bloody. It's got to be R-rated. I probably had a little hubris when I went in the room again, but they agreed with that and they were so excited about it. And then a $7 million budget ended up being a $1 million budget because of a fucking Ponzi scheme. And I had no clue, and I wish that I was smarter about that whole process, but I wasn't, so it left me really, really angry and bitter. And I wasn't getting work because, the movie didn't come out until it was technically finished in 2011 or 12. And then all the legal bullshit, people started suing the investors and stuff. It didn't ultimately come out until 2013, 2014. And, wasn't very well received, unfortunately. And I wasn't surprised because the movie that they ended up cutting was dog shit. So yeah, I definitely was bitter and angry, and it was brutal. And then the movie that I ended up doing after Knights of Badassdom, when we finally got it going, which was a godsend that this even happened while I was still kind of, working on what movie I wanted to do next after Wrong Turn 2. I kind of teamed up with a friend of mine from college, and we wrote Everly together. It was my story. And then I was like, I need someone to help me, kind of flesh this thing out. So I had a good friend, from college. He was like, yeah, I'll help you out. He had the same kind of sensibilities for weird action with very strange ideas. So we wrote Everly, and it ended up getting on the blacklist in 2010, I think it was, and immediately got sold. And, for those who haven't seen it, ultimately it starts Salma Hayek, but it's about a person, a woman who's trapped in this one location, and she has to shoot her way out. And I can now look back at that movie, both how I shot it, how I approached it, all of the, all the little details to it. And I can see a very angry person who is literally an artist who's trying to shoot their way out of the box. Both the trauma from Knights of Badassdom, I mean, it was traumatic on many fronts. Financially, it destroyed me because I wasn't able to work, and I had to, go back doing kind of blue collar jobs, which was fine. Sometimes it happens, but it threw me off big time. Like, it fucked up my confidence. It fucked up my creativity. Couldn't write. I was a fucking mess. But then when Everly kind of finally got going, I went into that thing like I feel like her character, where I came out guns blazing, and I look at that movie, and that is an angry fucking movie. That is somebody that's a director who is like pissed off at the world and ready to, turn that entire place into fucking Swiss cheese. But, like that's that's the part of the fun in a way of being able to look back at either your work or someone else's work when you hear a little bit of context and go, wow, like that's the mindset that that filmmaker had. You know, with Mayhem, that's a complete reflection of what happens when Everly comes out and the star of the movie poo-poos the movie because of one bad review calling it sexist, which I firmly think it is not. And then she decides not to promote it, which kind of tanks the movie. And I go back to office work, and a very disgruntled office at that. That's Mayhem, you know? So everything that I've done in one form or another is like peeling a layer of the onion back on me. You know, and whether you care about that or not, you know, that's your prerogative. But, you know, I love filmmakers. I love hearing stories about those filmmakers and what they, you know, like what they went through when they were making this movie and how that reflected on screen. And now that I have enough of a body of work and I have some distance from some of that stuff, I can see myself in those movies, you know, not because I'm making cameos of, you know, in the film, but just who that person was at that time. And yeah, I mean, Nights of Bad Aston was definitely where something changed in me and set me off on a different path. I think if Nights of Bad Aston had been the way that we always wanted it, I think it would have been a much bigger hit. I think critically it would have done better. I think I would have probably, you know, been offered different things, you know. And then that Truth in Journalism short, I was desperate to make anything. And Adi Shankar, I had a meeting with him once and he just went like, he had a lot of money to kind of throw around. And he was like, you know, would you want to do one of these fan films that I'm doing now for, you know, they're not Marvel. So you have to figure out a way that, you know, we can get around the IP, but would you want to do something? And I literally, Man Bites Dog is one of my favorite films of all time. My son Remy was actually named after the director, but I'm not allowed to say that because unfortunately Remy is associated with one of the most notorious films of all time and also committed suicide like 6 years later or whatever. So I was advised by John Landis to say it's the fucking rat from Ratatouille, but I love Man Bites Dog. I just so happened to be watching that, I think the night or two before I had that meeting when he offered that to me. And I went, well, what if we do Venom? But it looks like a grainy 16 millimeter movie that was shot in 1988. That happened between issue 299 and 300 of the Amazing Spider-Man when we introduced Venom. And he went, great, here's the money, go make it. I didn't have it still to this day is one of my favorite things that I've ever directed because I was given complete freedom. I had no cooks in the kitchen except for one thing that he wanted, which was he wanted to be in it. And it was a joy to work with. I felt like I was able to make amends to Ryan Quanten, who I absolutely adored working with on Nights of Bad Aston. But, you know, I wanted to make him a fucking movie star. I loved him in True Blood. And we had such a good time together on that. And then the movie turned into a disaster, and I'm sure it hurt his career too. So this was my way of creatively going, let's do this together. And I want to at least prove to you that I'm not a total douche schmo that was, you know, having panic attacks on the set the whole time. And we've now worked together, I think, at least 3 times, and it's a joy. So anyway, that's Truth in the Journalism. And that's also coming from a very angry place at that time. But, you know, if you are truly coming from an artistic, creative standpoint, the best artists in the world work out their issues through their art. And I can kind of say that, you know, I've done that before, and I'm really lucky that I have that, you know, that outlet in a way.
No, absolutely. You certainly, you have a home in the horror genre, but, you know, looking at everything from Everly to Point Blank, which are kind of like straight up action movies, something like Mayhem, like you mentioned, fusing horror and action. It's interesting because I want to segue to Suitable Flesh. Not that we couldn't talk about each of those projects for sure for a bit, but
I told you guys, you got me going, and I'm just.
No, it's all good. No, we love it. We love to hear all about like everything, you know, from your beginnings on down, including your mother's accent, which I hope comes back around again. But
don't worry, I'll bring it back. Don't worry.
With Suitable Flesh, I do want to first ask, where and when was that idea first hatched to you? Did Barbara Crampton hit you with it while working with you on Creep Show? How did the project kind of land in your lap?
Well, it landed outside of my lap years before when I actually had a bit of a conversation with Stuart about the movie at the time when it was called Thing on the Doorstep at a Masters of Horror dinner. I've been blessed that I've been able to go to those dinners. I don't think they're happening anymore, but there was a time that like every couple months, you know, Mick Garris would get the gang together, and it would be all of my fucking heroes and me and Adam. I mean, it was so weird. I felt like we would always joke that we were the masturbators of horror, and there should have been like a kids table for us while all the big dogs, like, you know, You had Wes Craven and Joe Dante and Toby Hooper and Michael Mann showed up, and there's Del Toro and Tarantino and Rodriguez showed up, and Rob Zombie. Carpenter showed up like once, but Stewart would go all the time, and we became like pretty good friends. He gave me great thoughts on Wrong Turn 2 when it came out and everything. Super nice about it. And one time that we were at one of these dinners, Stuart started talking about how he was going to make Thing on the Doorstep. And when he mentioned Dennis Paoli is writing the script and Brian Usna is back to produce, and Barbara's going to be in it and Jeffrey's probably going to be in it and stuff like that, I was like, whoa, this is like the Blues Brothers getting back together. Holy shit. Like, tell me more. So I knew that he was doing it. And then he passed on in 2020, and that was one of the projects that you just go like, well, I guess that's never going to happen. And lo and behold, maybe 2 months later after he died, I got an email from Barbara. And Barbara and I become friendly, like we weren't like as close as we are now, but we become friendly enough where I guess she, felt comfortable to reach out to me. And this was literally in the middle of the pandemic. Everybody was shut down. Everybody was locked down. I was personally in a bad place. And, this email pops up and it's Barbara, and she goes, hey, would you look at the script and would you be interested in possibly directing it? And two things struck me. One, Dennis Paoli was on the CC list. And two, I opened it up and it said The Thing on the Doorstep, and I shit my pants. I was like, is this a joke? Did I die of COVID and this is like a cruel prank? So I wrote her back and said, like, are you serious? And she's like, well, supposedly this is the lore that she and Dennis reached out to Stuart before he died and said, do you have any projects that you'd want to do, that you'd want us to kind of help produce or whatever? And he at that point knew that he was, not going to be around much longer. But they asked, like, is there anybody that you would want to direct Thing on the Doorstep? And supposedly he said my name. It wasn't quite like, when you heard that rumor that Walt Disney's final words were Kurt Russell, but I'm going to print the legend there. So they reached out to me. And now at this point, I just started, working with my now wife, but like my writing partner. And when we read the script together, I just kind of kicked it over to her and said, like, well, tell me what you think. We both had the same exact note, which was, this has got a lot of possibilities, but in this day and age, I don't think we can get away with this story if it's two guys. This is 2020. The Me Too movement had changed the landscape a little bit. I think there was a lot of factors just in terms of like gender equality and storytelling that the male gaze was not the alpha gaze of cinema at the time. With great, thank God, and it's not a trend. It was sorely needed. But we both kind of came back to each other and said, I don't think this movie can be made now. And that's when we started kicking around the idea of doing it where we flip the genders. So she had written up like an 8-page thesis on how we wanted to do this. And I basically stole it and sent it to Barbara and Dennis and said, this is what I want to do. And no harm, no foul. If you guys don't want to, do this, go with God. Good luck to the next person. But, if I want to direct it, I really want to try it from this approach. I think it'll be something really fresh and really exciting and make it dangerous again. And knowing that, Lovecraft was a bit of a bigot, like I think it'd be the nice subversive touch that people would think like, well, he's probably rolling in his grave, but respectfully. And shock of shocks, Dennis was the one who wrote back and said, I dig this. Give me a couple weeks. A couple weeks later, he sends back a draft, and it wasn't like he just went into final draft and just changed all the names. Like, he definitely dug in and created new characters out of what the basis for Dr. Derby and Dr. Upton to be female and not just, these doctors, but now they have boobs. He dug into it. And from there, we developed even more and refined it even more and everything and really got it to a good place. But it was that one email that changed everything. And, it really excited me. I love Stuart Gordon. He's one of those directors that definitely influenced me. He was one of those guys that would change genres up on a whim. Now, whether or not that was for gigs or not, didn't matter. He still made, Dolls and Re-Animator with the same verve as he wrote Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, or directed Space Truckers, or did, The Ants, or Stuck. The same guy did all those movies. And that's always been an inspiration for me. Like you guys were talking before about, doing, action films and other genres, along with horror. I love all genres. It would please me no end to do a romantic comedy next, honestly, like with no cynicism or sarcasm whatsoever. I would love to do a Western. I love all movies. It helps that like when you're starting out, especially now, like when I was first starting out, that you do something that you really truly feel like you love so much that you're going to put 200% into it. If the first gig that I had been offered had been a Lifetime movie, I don't think I probably would have put as much love into that as I would have with like Wrong Turn 2, but that put me on the map and made me a horror director. But I don't believe that Stuart Gordon is a horror director. I think he's just a director. And that has always been inspiring to me. And that's something that I've always wanted to aspire to. And I wanted to see that movie. So wanting to, do what kind of, I guess, Spielberg wanted to do with AI when Kubrick died, really channel the director as much as you can. I personally think that movie doesn't feel like a Spielberg movie or a Kubrick movie, but that's just my opinion. But that was my approach, is that like, I want to be able to satisfy the fetish that we've wanted with a Stuart Gordon movie done in this way, done with some of his cast members from other movies that he probably would have cast in those roles anyway, but also satisfy. I've always wanted to do an erotic thriller. I've always, wanted to explore, sexual fluidity and gender identity in movies. And I never had an opportunity to do that until now. So it was the sort of thing that felt like it was checking off so many boxes, and just, pardon my French, gave me like a major cinnaboner over like the possibilities of what we could do with this movie that made me go, let's go.
That's awesome. We definitely have some questions about the genre side of things, specifically with Suitable Flesh, because it is hard to classify. But before we get into that, I did want to ask, obviously there's, given, as you mentioned, the origins from like the Lovecraft story to Dennis Paoli's script, and having worked with Stuart Gordon on Re-Animator and From Beyond, of course, there's a lot there, and you've done a wonderful job of making this your own. But are there a few like little fun fan service bits in there that most people haven't picked up on that you'd like to throw in for those paying attention?
I see. It's so funny. I always feel like everything that's in there is like a deep cut. So things like the security guard in our movie is the son of Mace, the security guard in the original Re-Animator, not the actor, but the character. But he's dressed exactly the same. It says Mace Jr. If you're a fan of Re-Animator, you know Mace is the cigar chomping security guard from the first one. We use the same exact yellow palette in the hallways that they used in Re-Animator. So we tried to recreate Miskatonic down to the actual Miskatonic University shot that they had in Re-Animator. That's in Suitable Flesh. It's the same hospital. Now, there's something that I've done since, I guess it would be since Knights of Bad Aston. But I started this little game. My son Remy gave me when I was leaving for, it started with Everly. When I was leaving for Serbia to shoot Everly, Remy, who was very much into Star Wars at the time, still is, but he had all these action figures, like the old Star Wars action figures. And he gave me a Wicket and said, Wicket will be your best buddy on the trip. It was the cutest thing ever. So what I started doing was I started hiding this little Wicket who would always be in my pocket. And I, like, every day on set, I would always, and I would do this for every movie that I've done. I still did it for all the way up to Suitable Flesh, but I would take a picture and call it an Ewok bomb. And every single movie from Everly to Mayhem, Point Blank, my episodes of Creep Show, Suitable Flesh, the Ewok is somewhere in the mise en scène, if you will. And if you find it, I've done this in the past and I think I forgot a couple times too, but if you found it, I usually send like a poster out, if somebody talks about it online. So there is an Ewok bomb in Suitable Flesh somewhere. I'm not going to say where. I'll give you a hint. It's somewhere in a house. That's it. One Easter egg that not a lot of people get, and I'm a little bummed over it, only because I thought, like, at the very least, it generates a conversation about one of my favorite Stuart Gordon movies that no one talked about. So in Suitable Flesh, there's a scene where Heather's character has a patient who she hypnotizes, kind of to set up the idea that she can hypnotize someone for later on in the movie. I don't want to give too much away, but it's a bit of a setup for a payoff later on. But it also establishes the rules. It shows that she's not a complete douche in terms of being a doctor. Actually, no, that's not true, but you'll have to see the movie to find out. But we had a one day part for someone. Now, originally, it was written for Jeffrey Combs. Jeffrey was going to play that part to be a little bit of a reunion, not on camera, but like vicariously a reunion between Barbara and Jeffrey, because obviously they've done a few movies together through Stuart Gordon, and it only felt right. Unfortunately, and this was after numerous attempts to get Jeff to Mississippi where we shot, and Barbara was texting him every day, and we tried our best. And unfortunately, he just was too busy. I think he had a convention that weekend, and it's like the amount of money that we would have paid him to be there as opposed to the amount of money he would have lost if he didn't go to that convention. I totally get it. But it was a bummer because it would have been nice to have him in there. So Graham Skipper, one of my very, very close friends who I love dearly, who also has, many connections to Stuart Gordon. He was Dr. Herbert West in the Re-Animator musical that Stuart directed. He's been in, like a lot of Stuart's stuff before. He'd known him for years. He also became a director himself with Sequence Break, which is a great movie. Graham kind of, I don't want to give this too much away, but he kind of volunteered to be in the movie. He called me up and said, I want to be in the movie. I said, all I got is a corner. And he goes, I'll be there. Can you let me sleep on your couch? I said, sold. Jonah Ray, one of my very, very close friends, did the same exact thing. He texted me, he goes, why have you not cast me in this movie yet? I'm like, because I think all I have is orderly number 2. He goes, I'm in. Can I crash on your couch? I'm like, you got it. So Graham knows and is very good friends with Chris McKenna. Now, Chris McKenna is a great actor. He was the lead in King of the Ants, which is this very underseen Stuart Gordon crime thriller that came out, I believe, in like 2002, 2003, produced by the Asylum before they started making mockbusters. But it's a fantastic, really brutal crime film. We're starring Chris McKenna, Kari Wurr in some very steamy sex scenes, by the way, but also has George Wendt, Norm from Cheers, in arguably the most evil role you will ever see George Wendt play ever. He is diabolical and diabolically good. So anyway, I love that movie. I wish more people saw that movie. So Chris calls me and I've never met him before. He also was in Re-Animator the musical. So he knows Graham, and he goes, can I be in the movie too? And I'm like, I would love for you to be in the movie. I just don't have anything except for this one part. Actually, what if? So for all of you real Stuart Gordon nerds out there, or maybe hopefully when the special edition comes out, like which I've been hearing whispers that they're going to make a special edition of this movie. Chris, the character that is on the couch getting hypnotized by Heather in Suitable Flesh, is playing the same character that he played in King of the Ants back in the day. So there's one Easter egg there. It's like that same character that gets, the shit kicked out of him in King of the Ants is still having issues years later, but it should all feel like it's part of this like kind of Stuart Gordon universe. That's what we were going for. Here's another one. And this one is a little more controversial. So, Barbara Crampton was not supposed to be in the movie at first. She only wanted to produce the film. And, and rightfully so, she had just started working with this team AMP that also produced Suitable Flesh, but they did Jacob's Wife. They also did Glorious. And that was a movie that she was not in, but she loved producing it. And she is a fantastic producer. So I got it. And I didn't want to push her. And plus, when we got Heather, I kind of said to myself, like, do I want 2 blondes to be the leads in this? Like, I got a bunch of Karens running around. It might be a little weird, but I didn't push her on it. It wasn't until we cast everybody else when she had kind of looked at the cast that we had, Heather, Judah, Bruce, Jonathan, and she was kind of like getting FOMO. I think she was a little bit like, oh man, I kind of want to play, like you got this amazing cast, and we still did not cast Dr. Daniela Upton yet. And it was also, it was another producer who had said like, what if we, what about Barbara? And I was like, I don't know, guys. And then it was Barbara who said, what about me? And I went, actually, well, because I had worked with Barbara on Creep Show, and, I cast her specifically and put her name in the hat specifically so she could see that I knew how to make a day. So I was like auditioning more for her as a producer, but then I started working with her and as an actor, and the amount of prep she does, the amount of professionalism she exudes, she was amazing. And that was a hard fucking shoot. That was 3 days to shoot a 28-minute piece. Not easy, but she endured and she was amazing. And I loved working with her. So when she said she wanted to be in the movie, I'm like, all right, yeah, fucking A. Like I can look past the 2 blondes thing, whatever. Just from an aesthetic standpoint, it was still those two in those scenes, especially the stuff in the padded cell. It got me really excited. So at one point, though, I came up with the idea. I'm like, well, if we're really embedding this movie in the Stuart Gordon version of the Miskatonic verse, because Re-Animator and From Beyond, and to a very, very light extent, even Dagon, they're all connected. Stuart kind of tethered all of these to be in the same kind of world. Very much like how Don Mancini has, kind of connected all of the Child's Play movies and the TV series all together. They all kind of live in that world. And sometimes actors play different roles, but they're all still kind of in the same universe. I love that shit. I love it. Like, I grew up with Stephen King. So, when he created Castle Rock and Castle Rock kept coming up in books, I was in heaven. So at one point I had come up with the idea that one of my favorite Stuart Gordon movies is From Beyond. And I thought, well, whatever happened to Catherine McMichaels, her character in From Beyond? Now, one of the things that I used as a defense on any actor that they would pitch to me that was like in their late 20s, early 30s was, how can this character be so young and still published 3 books and is this renowned psychologist and has an outfit, like an office? Like, they wouldn't be 25 years old. So stop pitching me people that are so young. I need someone who's older and also hasn't lived life. Part of the reason why I feel like, Elizabeth Derby makes the choices she's made is that she's lived a life. She's fallen into some form of complacency. She wants danger and excitement and a new case. And I don't think someone in their 20s, is ready for that as opposed to someone in their 40s or 50s. So it had to be that age. And that was something that Barbara kept getting criticized for in From Beyond. Because you look at Re-Animator, and then a year later, Stuart shoots From Beyond, and she went from a young nubile co-ed, probably in her sophomore year or something in Re-Animator, to being a renowned therapist or doctor in From Beyond. And all they did was pull her hair back and throw her on some fucking glasses. It was hilarious. And I kept saying, like, I don't want that to happen. But then I started doing the math and thinking, well, what if we actually made Daniela Upton Catherine McMichaels years later? And Barbara loved that idea because it's like, well, now we get to bring her character back. We get to see what happened to her. So we wrote a draft that reflected that she was going to basically play that. And Barbara got it set in her head that was how we were going to do it. So we started looking for glasses that looked the same, and we started coming up with, character beats. Because if you think about it, like, if all that crazy shit from Beyond happened to me, I would want to change my name too in one form or another. Then we found out that MGM owned the rights to From Beyond, and that technically we couldn't use the name. Now, that said, that doesn't mean that, quote, Dr. Daniela Upton isn't Catherine McMichaels. And it doesn't mean that Barbara didn't necessarily play her like that. So I let the audience be the judge of that one, but I can at least pull the curtain back and let you know that was definitely what we were going for. They, like, people on Twitter right now were like, she looks just like Catherine from Beyond. I'm like, that was very deliberate, because you know what? It could be. It totally could be her.
Very nice.
Thank you for revealing your secrets to us.
Shh, don't tell anybody else. No one's going to listen to this. It'll be fine. It'll just be between the 3 of us. It's totally cool.
I do appreciate, though, you sticking with, casting, women of an appropriate age, because we all know that, once women pass a certain age in Hollywood, they don't get enough love, unfortunately. But I do want to talk about some performances, speaking of the cast, with the body-mind swapping dynamic in this. It's just a really fun opportunity, I imagine, for actors to play with their physicality, their diction, like all these small details that kind of let you know who is inhabiting a body. And Judah Lewis and Heather Graham are incredible. Did you experiment with the performances to determine how subtle versus how obvious you wanted it to be for the audience?
Well, I grew up with body swapping movies, everything from Freaky Friday to, vice versa, like Father Like Son, 18 Again. Like, there's so many body swap movies that it's practically its own genre, right? And one of the things that I think, like, audiences, including myself, they love to see is how certain tics, certain mannerisms, certain personality traits are then translated by other actors because they've now body swapped. There's something really fun about that. In this case, and then we're kind of getting into spoiler territory, but I don't know. The movie's on Shudder now, so it's up to you to go see it. And if you've listened to me long enough here, hopefully you shut me off and you've gone to see the movie and come back and listen to the rest. But with the idea that this entity, right, who is not Ephraim Waite, Ephraim Waite is just another vessel for this entity that we never really give a name to. It's a disembodied force. It's it's a threat that has no moment in the movie. No, I'm sorry to disappoint here, but it doesn't have a moment at like the end of the movie where, some big, crazy, fleshy monster shoots out of someone's chest and finally reveals itself and everybody goes, that looks fake. We don't have that. I didn't want that. So we had to create a creature organically from the ground up that you never see. So it's almost interpreted through all these different people trying to create one performance trait. And once we had Heather and Judah and Bruce, those are the three that I kind of leaned on the most, especially Bruce, to kind of start creating the mannerisms, the crooked hand, some of the vernacular, some of the inflections, the vocal inflections. We were kind of all getting together and, over Zoom at first and then in person to come up with these little things, whether it was the smoking or, which I know one producer wanted to take out because well, no one wants to see anybody smoke. I'm like, yeah, but this guy smokes, and I think it's something that'd be exciting to see other people smoke as a tell. It's like playing poker. There's all these tells and we wanted to establish them because I knew until I deliberately wanted to confuse the audience and onto who's who, which happens in the third act. If I tried to confuse the audience in the beginning, I'd lose the audience. I didn't want to create mystery, which, Hitchcock says mystery is where, the characters are kind of ahead of the audience. Here, I wanted suspense. I wanted the audience to know more than the characters sometimes. So they needed to know who was who, at all times until deliberately we say, no, we don't want you to. And that is achieved through tells and ticks. So all of us got together over Zoom. I actually had Bruce read everybody's dialogue anytime that they were Ephraim and recorded it. And I distributed that to the cast anytime that they were possessed by the entity. And not, we didn't take everything, but there were nuggets of certain things that were like, even down to like anytime that he rolls a cigarette or it rolls a cigarette, because he's, the entity is gender fluid here, or non-binary, it would spit some residue tobacco out. And I went, that's great. I want to use that, because visually, as long as I'm able to kind of, differentiate between the entity and whoever's the non-entity, then the audience knows. And that's a really important tool, especially when you're doing a body swap movie,
Yeah, and I agree with Becky. Done to good effect here. And we mentioned actually earlier, it's easy to pigeonhole Joe Lynch as a horror guy because obviously you're a big genre fan from 3 years old, we found out. But again, playing with action, playing with other genres, this is kind of a film difficult to classify in those terms because it has different tones and different genres at points. But an attaboy from us for just having, the sex scenes themselves just harken back to like the erotic thriller, a genre that's not really played around enough in anymore. Because as you're release the Joe Lynch campaign hashtag, our hashtag unofficially several episodes back was make movies horny again, because it's like the most sexless world we've ever lived in nowadays with the mainstreaming of things.
It's depressing because like I grew up where, and not to sound like a pig, but like whenever I'd want to get my kicks out of a movie, especially one that I felt like was like a little bit dangerous, a little bit risque, I wanted an equal amount of sex and violence, and a lot of Stuart Gordon's movies that influenced this movie, like that I grew up with in the 80s on VHS, like Re-Animator, like From Beyond, they had a certain horniness to it or a sexiness to it that was really exciting. And it wasn't just sex equals death. That was like Cronenberg. Cronenberg is inherently horny. Dead Ringers was a big influence on this movie just to bring a sexuality to it that whenever there is not tentacles or cancer coming out of people's, faces or body swapping with a fly, so to speak, Cronenberg always has an erotic sensibility. Or Verhoeven, the guy made fucking RoboCop, but they also made Spetters, and he also did obviously Basic Instinct. Genre directors shouldn't shy away from sexuality as long as it's not just the typical, like, if you have sex, Jason's going to come and split you in half. Like that just became old really, really fast. And I think that part of it, and at least in the last, 10 years, or maybe 8 to 10 years, has been one of the unfortunate side effects of the Me Too movement, because when people started to call assholes out on exploiting women and men on casting couches or on the set or being disgusting or doing things off of consent, now, all of a sudden you have intimacy coordinators, which again should be there. If the directors and the producers did their jobs, we wouldn't need an intimacy coordinator. So now you got to have one, which means more money, costs more to have it. And there is a definite vibe on a set with an intimacy coordinator that sometimes does not elicit a sexy situation, and I'm not poo-pooing their job. They're there for a reason. But I've been on sets before where they're like, can they just turn away? Because it's kind of weird. Because whenever I've done a sex scene before, there should only be 2 people in that room aside from the actors, and that's the camera person and the director. That's it. Now you have someone else who's sitting there eating a sandwich and going like the nun in dance scenes where they're like, 6 inches, get that roller out. And that sometimes it's not conducive to a sexy scene. I get why people have been skittish about bringing sexuality into their storytelling. Plus, you got to have a reason for it more now than ever. I think we've pulled the curtain back on why some people ask for a sex scene. Like Joel Silver would, click a timer every 8 minutes. And if there isn't a flash of boob or some action, there better be. There's certain movies that I can call out specifically that right in the middle of the movie, now there's a sex scene between 2 people who are like on the run from the cops and the bad guys, blah, blah, blah. And they get a hotel room. And next thing you know, they're having sex. And you're like, that makes no sense. Where's the chemistry? Where's the, why are they having sex? Oh, it's because someone in the ether is saying like, well, it's time for sex, everybody, because that's what everybody expects in the second act. They spoiled the broth a little bit. So hopefully between Saltburn and Poor Things and Infinity Pool, Suitable Flesh, I hope that the filmmakers are starting to realize that sexuality in many guises, both the act itself, both the gender side of it, there's so many factions of how sex can be used effectively in storytelling and character building, or decimation, if you will. It just has to be done right, and it has to be done with the right people, and it has to be done, obviously with consent. It has to be done to service the overall story. And if it does, then go crazy. That's what we tried to do with this. We wanted to make sure that sex was a major component of the story, because I had very rarely seen a movie like this where the main bad guy is not out just for world domination or, to take over some enterprise or what have you, or be the president. No, it's got a fetish and it's horny and it's bored, and that to me is a lot scarier than world domination.
Right. No, the clicking that Joel Silver might have done just became like 4-quadrant clicking. It was like, no, you have to be, hitting the all ages family stuff. And I think the big franchises moved that direction. But I'm with you. There's still a world for this, and you've certainly proved, thinking outside the box and making movies outside the box. Even though the pitch meetings nowadays have people looking for that, very in the box stuff. I'm glad Joe Lynch is out there existing, still keep pushing forward the other kinds. Again, suitable. Stop. No. Suitable Flesh is on Shudder now. And it's funny you mentioned Jonah Ray. Also check out Destroy All Neighbors, also on Shudder now. Just a side plug for those guys.
Absolutely. I wouldn't necessarily say that Destroy All Neighbors is a good double feature with Suitable Flesh. Actually, no, it's a fantastic one, mainly because it's a Jonah Ray doubleheader. Jonah's in Suitable Flesh and in Destroy All Neighbors. And
there you go.
Fucking love that guy.
You mentioned Coscarelli a few times. That movie certainly has shades of him.
Oh, big time. I when I watched it, because I read the script a couple of years ago before I did Suitable Flesh, and the guys asked me if I knew anybody that would be suitable, no pun, to make this movie. And I hooked them up with RLJ, which ended up producing the movie, like Mark Ward. And so I get a nice little thank you in there, which is great. They, called me out a couple times on it. But, I've always felt like Jonah was like a leading man. There was just something about him. He had a gravitas to it. And seeing the final film, it's like if Sam Raimi and the Coen brothers body swapped and Sam Raimi ended up making Barton Fink. That's the closest way that I can describe that movie, at least in my heart, where it feels like the kind of that enclosed nature, that claustrophobia that Barton Fink has, but then with Sam Raimi kind of visuals and Sam Raimi from Evil Dead 2 era, those kind of histrionics. Oh man, I can't, that's a movie that I can't wait to watch again, like on a Friday night with a couple beers and a pizza. Oh, I'll be in heaven.
Right. And in very Cronenberg fashion, long live the suitable flesh. Definitely check this out on Shudder.
Oh,
But yeah, thank you for the all the candor with the your background and your career and with Suitable Flesh. I hope some more folks find this movie on Shudder for sure. We will jump right quick into the Rapid Fire 15, which is a bit we do with guests. And the gist of this is, I kind of gave you a heads up ahead of time, but we're just giving you some of your favorite things. So it's first thing that comes to mind. There's no points. It's not a test. Just more about like letting the listeners know a little bit about the genre stuff you love.
let's go. Let's do it.
All right. Right. Question 1. What movie do you think you've seen the most in your life?
Oh, the movie I've seen the most in my life. Holy crap. I guess it would be No. I would say it would be Rob Reiner's Misery, which I saw 11 times in the theater. And I've seen it many times since, but that's definitely the record for the most times I've ever seen a film in the theater. It's definitely Rob Reiner's Misery.
Impressive.
Number 2, you mentioned stuff didn't scare you early on because your mother kind of exposed you to Fangoria and such, but was there a film that really stuck with you and gave you nightmares early in life?
Yeah, the original Nightmare on Elm Street was something that like gave me a lot of nightmares, and it wasn't even seeing the movie. It was the commercial for the movie on HBO. All they showed was the shot of Heather Langenkamp in bed and Freddy like descends from the ceiling. I remember seeing that at like 11 o'clock at night and couldn't sleep for days. So the original Nightmare on Elm Street still gets me.
Classic. Speaking of classics, what is your favorite horror movie franchise?
Oh, my favorite horror movie franchise. Wow, shit. I would almost have to go with Dawn of the Dead, like the Romero zombie series. You know, every single one is different in their own unique sort of way, and I always find something in each one of them. And I think that that's something Romero, strove to do, that he was always trying something different. I would almost maybe second that with Phantasm, because Phantasm also has like, no, you know what? I'm going to go with the Nightmare on Elm Street series. As much as I love, Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers, there was something about that Nightmare on Elm Street series that really affected me. Like, it both gave me nightmares, and then 4 years later, I'm like cheering for Freddy. I'm like, what the fuck happened here? It's like it was a complete character switch that I think was really exciting. So yeah, I would go with the Nightmare on Elm Street series. Would be like maybe my favorite out of all of the franchises, if you will.
No, common answer and a good one for sure. What about favorite horror movie subgenre?
Ooh, let's see. Favorite horror movie subgenre. I would go with body horror. I love feeling like uncertain about my body. I mean, most Cronenberg movies, or there's this great Australian movie called Body Melt that came out a couple of years ago that always freaked me out. Anything that deals with the body and like how the body can turn on you, or like betray you, if you will, has always freaked me out in real life and in film. So I would go with like body horror would definitely be my favorite subgenre.
All right. Question 5. Is there a particular piece of art that always brings you to tears? Music,
Art in
any form.
Always cinema. Like I never understood how people could read something, like read a book and be like, oh, it brought me to tears. I'm like, yeah, you can put it down. But I think, and same with, I mean, music to a degree can do that. But I think cinema is the ultimate coagulation of sight and sound, sometimes smell, context, story. There's something about everything coming together with cinema and being able to present itself to you, these certain emotions. Cinema always gets me, and it takes a lot for me to cry, but I've never been that person who's like listened to an opera and be like, oh, I'm tearing up in the car, or read a book or whatever, or, even look at a painting. Like, I can appreciate it. I can respect it. I can let it affect me emotionally. But cinema is my ultimate emotional, like, vessel, if you will. And maybe that's the reason why I work in it. It's like, I want to either give back or I want to inflict those tears on someone else. So yeah, no, I would definitely say cinema is definitely the ultimate tear-inducing art form for me.
Well, in that vein, what would be your favorite twist ending in a film? If it's something recent, maybe you don't have to spoil it, but you have a favorite all-time movie twist ending?
I mean, it's usually like the greats. Like I remember being in the theater seeing Sixth Sense, for the first time, or Usual Suspects. Oh God, I'd have to think about that more. But I would go with Usual Suspects only because I did not see it coming at all. I don't think anybody did when it came out. I know that that's such a familiar answer, I'm sure, but like that one is that's one where I go like did not see that coming. Now, and then that was right at the time that I was like, okay, I'm starting to work in the business now. Like I'm looking for all those tropes, and that one just kind of totally threw me for a loop.
Nice. Question 7. If you had to take one filmmaker's filmography with you on an island, and only one, who would it be?
John Carpenter. Yeah, easily. And mainly because he's, again, like Stuart Gordon, he's one of those directors who has constantly changed the game for himself, for other people, for the genre itself. He's always retained, his style, so to speak. And he's just consistently been one of those directors that, like, whether it's Elvis the movie or Halloween or Escape from New York or They Live or Big Trouble in Little China, the list goes on and on and on. Even some of the movies that some people don't like of his, I always find inspiration for it. And, like if somehow he transported to that desert island too, it would be a fun, like, he'd probably be really surly and pissed off about it and stuff like that. But then I would fire up the Xbox and start like playing NBA Jam and hand him the fucking joint, and we'd be all good. We'd be best buddies, and then I'd be able to get all the really great stories out of him.
Yeah. No wrong answers to that question, but that was the right answer. Do you have a favorite film festival experience or theater screening? Not necessarily your own, but that could be the case too. Or were you just part of a magical moment in a film festival where a movie blew people away, or one of your movies had an incredible reaction?
I wish this was mine, but it was when I got to see the reaction of people walking out of Blair Witch Project when it first premiered. I was dressed as the Toxic Avenger. I had seen a screening of Ravenous, Antonia Bird's Ravenous, at Sundance that year, and which did not go well. And then I came out, and then the theater that was next to us, these people were walking out, and they looked like they had just seen a ghost. And we were in the bus going up Park City, the main street. And I went up to one of the ladies after I had taken off my Toxic Avenger costume and said, like, I'm sorry, miss, but what did you just see? And this lady, who sounded very much like my mom, so I'm going to paraphrase here. Oh my God, I just saw a snuff film. It was awful. I don't know why this festival showed this movie. They should be arrested. Of course, I get tickets the next morning at 5:00 in the morning. I had to see it. But the reaction that this audience had was undeniable. The only thing that I can compare that to is I saw a sneak preview of Starship Troopers, and it was like an advanced screening or whatever. And midway through the movie, the entire crowd stood on their feet and cheered. I was like, oh, I love this movie. I like when that's the sort of reaction that every filmmaker strives for. And that was one I'll never forget.
Man, Blair Witch and Ravenous at the same fest. That's amazing.
It was crazy because everybody was rooting for Ravenous, and no one knew what the fuck the Blair Witch Project was. That next day, everybody forgot about Ravenous, and everybody was talking about Blair Witch. So it's funny how things like that work.
Yep. Switching gears away from films, do you have a favorite concert you've attended?
Favorite concert that I've attended, I would say one of them was for one of my favorite bands of all time called Fart Barf. It was one of the first shows that I'd ever gone with my now wife. We went to go see it. We had a common interest in this freaky band called Fart Barf that is a synthwave band that is like an analog synthwave band. They dress as simians. They have simian masks and astronaut outfits. And it's 3 guys on stage who supposedly are in other bands, very popular bands, but this is like their side project. And they were playing this dinky show, like this dinky club, Spaceland in LA. And we went, and I will never forget it because, like, totally fell in love with my now wife again. I think it's the first time that I ever said I love you to her. But also, I got so beaten up, so horribly beaten up. I looked like there's a moment in Poltergeist when the nerdy guy pulls up his shirt after like running out like from the upstairs, and it looks like somebody took a bite out of him. I had a bruise that looked like the map of the United States on my side. It was disgusting looking, but it was also kind of cool too. It looked very Cronenbergian. But like any band that's going to put me through the ringer in the pit And it wasn't even a pit. I was just there in the front, and all these hipsters were beating the shit out of each other, and I was there too. And yeah, that was definitely easily one of the most memorable shows I'd ever been to. Good old fart bar.
Follow up with a similar music thing. You got into metal thanks to Mr. the Clown back there. What is your favorite all-time metal band, would you say?
I don't know if you necessarily classify them as metal, but Faith No More is my favorite band of all time. That's my desert island band. That's the band I want to play at my funeral. They're my favorite band. I'll never they're just my be all end all. Like I remember hearing Epic the first time in '89, and like I've just been a devotee ever since. I got to work with them a couple times. They were nice enough to give me a song for free for Mayhem because I had done a music video for them. They're just one of those unclassifiable bands, and that's kind of my thing. I would rather listen to a band or an artist or a director or whatever that can be unclassifiable. I think that's much more exciting artistically than anything else. And Faith No More is one of those bands that definitely inspired me to say, don't put Baby in a corner, and don't put me in a corner either.
Indeed. Tough to classify. I think metal's definitely one subgenre that they would probably fall under. Speaking of music, do you have a go-to karaoke song? Or if you don't do karaoke, what would you do if you had enough courage?
I haven't done enough karaoke lately. The one immediately when you said that, the one that I've done in the past that I prefer, there's two. It's either Saying Ain't So from Weezer or Dead Man's Party from Oingo Boingo.
I'd pay money to hear Joe Lynch sing both of those, either of those.
Well, get me in a karaoke room and let it rip.
One of these days at a future Fantastic Fest, possibly. So, penultimate question. If you could program a double feature of any two films in the world for the world to know Joe Lynch, maybe it shows Your Two Wolves, or maybe just a pair of films you love dearly, maybe some we've already mentioned on the show, what would a perfect double feature that you could program for the masses be? However you want to frame it.
Perfect double feature. Well, there's one that might actually get programmed at a certain film festival that I know that Aaron and Cameron have been to before. That we actually, I met up with them a couple years ago. Panic Fest might play this double. I don't know. Not going to give it too much away, so I don't want to see that one. But I would say a perfect double for who I am right now would probably be, and this is going to be like way not what anyone is going to expect, but I would go with When Harry Met Sally and Thank God It's Friday. I know you guys are probably scratching your heads at this point, but When Harry Met Sally, I think is a perfect film. It is one of the most romantic film ever. It's just a perfectly made film. And it's the movie that my wife and I watch every New Year's Eve without fail. And the whole time we're watching it, we're like watching edits and watching like certain lines and production quality and shit like that. Like more than just going, oh, it's so cute. Thank God It's Friday is a movie we discovered last year, and we actually showed as a secret screening at Panic Fest last year. We didn't tell anybody what we were showing. We got dressed up like in disco wear. And I forgot to mention the Academy Award winning Thank God It's Friday, just for legitimacy. It won the Oscar for Best Song for Donna Summer's Last Dance. And it is such a pure, joyous cinematic experience. And we watched it like 3 times before we like offered to show it at Panic Fest as like a secret screening. And Adam there was like, are you guys fucking crazy? Tore the fucking roof off the place. And people still to this day on Friday
I love it.
tweet about that fucking screening. Thank God It's Friday. It's this disco movie with fucking Jeff Goldblum. It's one of those like one night only movies. Like everything's happening at this one disco on a Friday night. It's bonkers. So I would definitely say those two movies are at least the unconventional version. I can come up with a bunch of other ones, but if I had, and there's a double feature in particular that I'm not going to give away right now that I would program first, but those two are the alternates, and you just can't go wrong with those two.
No, I love that. Love that answer.
Well, now I know what I'm doing this Friday. All right.
I'm just telling you right now, you're welcome. When you watch that movie, you are fucking welcome. You're going to see the greatest Jeff Goldblum introduction in a movie ever. That's all I'm going to say. Good. You're welcome.
I cannot wait. All right. Last question. What would be your dream project to make? Is there an original idea or an IP that you'd like to adapt? Or maybe like a time period you haven't done?
Well,
anything
considering
like that.
Considering that fucking David Bruckner got the Blob over me, that because I've been working on trying to get the Blob for 10 years, and then Bruckner just goes in and swoops in and grabs it. No, like honestly, I love David and God bless him, but I was still a little bummed because I really, again, like I said, The Blob is a very important movie for me on so many fronts. So I wanted to do the next iteration and was very close about 4 or 5 times. So that was a bit of a bummer, so who knows, maybe I'll wait like 20 more years, and then after Bruckner's done with his, I'll do another one. It'll be great because The Blob means a lot to me. Anything Stephen King. Stephen King means the world to me. And, like there's certain stories of his that I'm very, very close with that either haven't been done before or have been done, but haven't been done to my liking. And I would love to take another stab at it. Like, as much as I love Silver Bullet, I would love to see someone do Cycle of the Werewolf, the book that it was originated on, and do something a little more faithful to that. And I don't think anyone would disagree with me here, but the wolf sucks in that movie. It looks like a big bear. So I would love to do something in the Stephen King world, because Stephen King was the writer that really, changed my life in terms of like fear and pop culture and the way to really scare people, but do it with like panache and do it with like hometown charm. He's the first guy that I ever read a novel from with Christine, and he likes my movies, which is great. I got to do something with Creepshow a couple of years ago, and he mentioned he loved those, but he saw Mayhem, which blew my mind. So I want to give back, so anything Stephen King is definitely bucket list shit for me.
No, we feel like before long your name will be on something in that vein, and we're excited to see it. There's some stuff we can't talk about yet with you, of course, but the main thing was to really get Suitable Flesh on people's radar, because we are fans of you, we are fans of that movie, and again, we talk about Shudder every single episode. They should be paying us for how much we promote Shudder. But yes, check out Suitable Flesh on Shudder. A little cha-ching sound every time we mention it.
Yes. Or you're going to hear me go, like I'm going to orgasm every time someone, watches it.
There's our sound drop in the future with your permission. Every time Shudder gets mentioned, Joe Lynch will go, all right, cool. He didn't say no.
No, it's all yours. It's yours for the taking. No. Guys, this was awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
yes,
thank you. We ran a little long with you, so we appreciate you barreling through. That was the end of the rapid fire. And again, you ace with flying colors, even though there's no points. But yes, thank you again for making the time. Again, Suitable Flesh on Shudder now.
All right. Take care, Joe.
Yeah,
that's it. We're done.
Joe. You are done, sir. Our thanks again to Mr. Joe Lynch, and again, Suitable Flesh now on Shudder. We kind of did a quick wrap up with him at the end there, because he had a heart out. In fact, we didn't even get to some stuff that we wanted to talk to him about, which is, again, Paper Street being a fan of the Movie Crypt podcast. Becky admitted she's been a long-time listener, further back than I think even any of us. But I will say, when we were kind of launching this idea, the Movie Crypt podcast was one of the very few that we cited as kind of an inspiration and an influence to get a filmmaking-centric, genre-centric podcast up and running. So what are your overall take on the Movie Crypt, since you're a decade-long listener?
Yeah. I mean, I do remember specifically calling it out when we first talked about the origins of this podcast, and Movie Crypt was a big inspiration for me. Kind of kept me going as a filmmaker. One of the big themes of the show is kind of resilience and not giving up, and using resources at your disposal. And they had some amazing guests over the years. And gosh, yeah, I mean, I've been listening now for we've established over a decade, but it goes back before that. But I do specifically remember being on my maternity leave, and it's kind of a time when you're a little bit self-reflective and not doing the day job. So I had a lot of time to binge podcasts, and that was kind of a weekly tradition. And I was doing a lot of writing in between, cleaning up baby vomit and changing diapers and all that. But that really was a big inspiration for me to keep going with filmmaking as kind of, I guess, a side career, side hustle, whatever you want to call it. So, props to the Movie Crypt. If you haven't checked it out, you should go back to episode 1 and just dive in. There's so much great content.
You mentioned it keeping you going. I mean, Joe himself admitted even on this show, talking about how the Don Coscarelli interview, among others, kept him going when he was at his lowest. So yeah, he's admitted that the show itself's kind of kept him involved. So we're glad to see him really rolling. But yeah, definitely check that show out too. I'll have a link to that in the show notes at paperstreetpodcast.com. Early inspiration and influence to this here program as well.